Hey people, I'm just here to take a look at the XPS 15. So this is the 2021 model. So oozing and dancing, quite nice. First impression when you lift it up, it's actually heavier than it looks. So I think it's because it's quite metallic in build. So it's CNC machined aluminum, and I think on the side you can see just how pristine and nice the finish is. I think on the inside we've got the black version. So there's going to be a white version where the outside casing is a little bit lighter color as well, I think. That one, apparently the fingerprint is a little bit easier to ignore. Whereas on this one, I think they've made the fingerprint, I think certainly compared to the earlier XPS versions, a little bit harder to detect. You will notice it over time. Generally the lid feels reasonably sturdy, but as you can see, if we move it, the lid does wobble a little bit. I think it's just because the lid is quite heavy. I think it bends some way back. It doesn't go all the way back, but I think it will do for most people. The movement is really smooth, which is quite nice. And if you slowly close it, it doesn't suddenly shut. And if you try to lift it with one hand, it doesn't lift the front of the laptop up too abruptly, which is quite nice. On the base cover, you can see quite large air intake, additionally some speaker outlets here. But you'll also see that you need torque screw in order to open the base cover rather than standard screw. Okay, so 1.92 kilos, so it's actually quite light, but it feels a lot heavier. I don't really know why. With charger, it's a little bit heavier, but that's what you expect. You either get 90 or 130 watts charger. On the 130, it's usually for the dedicated graphics-based models. There is an integrated graphics version. I guess that's what the 90 is probably for, but it's actually not the most powerful charger you would have thought they would have included, but you know, some people probably value portability, and we've not really run into too much excessive beyond 130 scenarios. Okay, right. Back to the laptop. You already know that the processor, the graphics, and the display are basically the main areas of improvement in this generation. You get 11th gen processor on this one. So interesting thing is the i5 is now 6-core. It takes position of the intra-range i7 previously. Has the hyper-threading, so 6-core 12-thread. So I think on paper that looks to be actually decent. I just, in practice, don't think that many people who buy XPS would want an i5, but that's a strange one. As for graphics, now you have the 3050 or 3050 Ti, which is quite a step up from the 1650 previously. And I think because it's RTX series, you do have that ray tracing. Some of your apps might use, for instance, if you do some Blender, etc. I don't know how niche that might be. As for gaming, it's probably not the laptop to get for gaming, especially if the price is a factor, because I think for the same price you can probably get a 3060 laptop, 3070 laptop in a more traditional form factor. But I think as far as this laptop goes, it's one of the most polished laptop you can have at the price range. So it's not going to give you the best graphic performance, but for everything else, it's just exquisite in the finish. So on the inside, you'll see the screen, 1920 by 1200. So it's a little bit longer. And the bezel, it just looks really, really compact. So it's 89% screen to body aspect ratio. So it's really, really modern and quite impressive. I think on top, because it's so thin, you don't get a privacy shutter. I think on this version we do have the IR webcam, which is quite nice. I sort of wonder how you can do privacy shutter. Would you just do a electric tape over it? I mean, that's hardly elegant, but still it's better than the webcam placement in the previous gen on the bottom. The keyboard, I'll probably say it's good enough, I think, for everyday use. It's maybe not as nice as some of the more business range laptops, but it seems fine. If you have this laptop docked, of course you can just plug in an external mechanical keyboard or something to that effect. This trackpad, I think this is the first impression, it's just absolutely massive. I think it reminds me slightly of the MacBook Pro 16 from 2019-2020. I don't know how much you can see, but I can already see that this needs a clean. So yes, it seems a little bit easier to ignore the fingerprint marks on this model, but it's still there. Whereas with the Mac, because it's finished in a specific way, you don't really notice the fingerprint as much. I guess if you're picky about fingerprint, get the white version. The only thinking against that is, does white gradually turn yellow over time? I don't know. It probably doesn't. If done a few generations, probably one too many to know. As for the ports, you have 2 Thunderbolt 4s and 1 USB-C and SD card. The card, it does poke out a little bit, as well as the audio jack. That's it. Yeah, so Thunderbolt 4, thankfully, is one of the improvements on this generation. It might help with some workload if you have more exotic docking needs. We've got some, well, these tiny adapter things from Dell, which can be quite useful. So it was included in the box. What it does is HDMI plus 1 USB type A. I think the intention of this is just to tie you across until you can find a dock of your own, because just 1 USB type A port is not exactly allowed. Some of the laptop you might consider as alternative to this, for instance, the Arrow 15, they would have more ports, but it's also a little bit less absolutely polished as you get here. The speaker on this model, there's some up firing and the downwards firing, so it's actually 4 speakers. Actually has subwoofers as well, which is really quite impressive. Audio experience wise, it's going to give you really nice setup when you're moving. Of course, if you're at home, then external speaker is probably still preferred, that or headphones. Quite intriguing fact about the display is all the 3 options you have, they're 60 Hz. At the moment, there's no 120, 165 Hz options. So that's one of the obvious downsides at the moment. So if you do get the Full HD, it's the more power optimal version, uses around 4 watts, but that goes up to around 10 watts if you have the 4K panel. If you have the OLED panel, and that one can be really power demanding, especially if you display white text. So that one goes up to 12 watts. So almost 3 times energy use of the Full HD. I think personally, I really like the Full HD option. If you want the touchscreen, then the OLED will be the go-to one. So this is matte finish. The other 2 more high-end panels, they are anti-reflective, but I suspect you'll get more glare on them. I think for me, I value battery life, so that's why I'll probably go with Full HD. And if I do need more resolution, just plug it into a 4K display and only run on those displays. Out of the box, this laptop has a Dell Power Manager. So it's the traditional Dell app that lets you choose how you balance between effectively performance, heat, and noise. We've got optimized version, so I think this one is a little bit cooler, so it's not the absolute performance. So you also have the ultra performance. This is one you really want if you do this rendering. It does get a little bit more noisy, but at the moment I can't hear it ramping up. I think generally the fan on this system is actually quite impressive, unless you do both the CPU plus GPU workload, in which case it gets quite noticeable. I think it's quite interesting that Dell has their own app that you go into to set these. It takes a little while to open, and I think some manufacturers just integrate it into the Windows toggle, which I think is an easier thing to do, but they'll do the same thing, I think. So there's also the cool and quiet option. I think the cool, it just runs it less hot. The quiet is where the performance is a little bit throttled back, just to not make too much noise. I think in the everyday, the optimize is perfectly fine. As for the TDP, it varies a little bit depending on which mode you select. Notebook Checks has done quite a detailed thing into this, so not here to reinvent the wheel, just look at the review. If I remember, Notebook Checks has done a quite detailed look at the optimized versus ultra performance mode in terms of the TDP. So I think take a look there. It's not here to reinvent the wheel. They've done great work there. As for how the laptop copes, we've run some synthetic stress. So when we run CPU only, it's going between maybe 2.5 to 3.4 gigahertz, oscillating in between that. So this is a CPU only, the Prime 95. I think this is what we probably expected. This is a tier below the workstation grade laptop. So if you think of this equivalent in the Precision lineup, it's a 5560. The one above that is usually the 7560. So the one that's more bulky workstation wise, I think that one has a lot better cooling. But I think this one, it gives you decent ability to get some cooling and get some work done, which is helpful. When we run the CPU, as we've mentioned, it does go between 3.4 and 4.4. And throughout this, you can see the temperature hovering into late 80s, but it seems manageable. When you do run CPU plus GPU, especially in the context of 130 watts charger, which is not a lot, you do see the system scaling back quite significantly. So anything in red is our benchmark for the CPU plus GPU. As you can see, instead of 2.4 to 3.4, it's down to 1.5-ish. It's probably too synthetic and it's probably not representative of real world use. This was also done in the optimized power mode. So if you run the ultra performance mode, you can probably get a little bit extra headroom. I mean, having said that, this is not meant to be the laptop that you use to stress heavily synthetically. Just something that gives you reasonable performance, very exquisitely polished design. So I think that's two different use cases. If you need the absolute performance, go get yourself a workstation laptop. But if you want something that you can do edits on, use it, internal trackpad, get really good experience and be happy to use it, after work, watch a movie, etc., then this, I think, is a really good mix for most people. I think if it's the scenario that if you're more of a heavy user or content creator and this doesn't really do it for you, then there are plenty of additional options out there. The TDP for the GPU has went down from about 50 watts max to about 45 watts. I think performance-wise, overall, you probably get 30 to 40% more performance than 1650. So it's quite a substantial gain, and additionally, because it's ray tracing enabled, it's going to give you some longevity. I mean, it's not to say that you'll be able to run much ray traced games at high setting, because it's still more of an entry-range RTS card, if there's such a thing as entry-range and RTX. Okay, as for the CPU power limit, it lets you go up to about 93 watts for a very short time, probably a few seconds, and then it goes back to a very stable 45 watts. So PL2 is 93 watts, but it doesn't stay there much, at least in the power optimized mode. As for the upgradability, you do get some extent of it, which is nice. 2 times M2 slots. It lets you use PCIe 4 card, which is useful potentially if you're a content creator. And additionally, there are 2 RAM slots, which I think could be really, really useful if you want to use it to go up to 64 gig. Again, it's not a workstation, so if you want anything, for instance, 128 or more RAMs, then you'd have to go with Dell Precision lineup. So on those, sometimes you can get 3 or 4 M2 slots, and you can also get, I think, up to 128 gig of RAM on the workstation level laptop. But I think for most people, 64 is a quite decent ceiling, I think. The RAM goes up to 3200 megahertz, so it's a little bit faster than before last gen. But I think for most people, that's not the difference maker. So this is a less good case scenario in terms of synthetic stressing. So on the top, you can see nearly 50 degrees near the center of the keyboard. This is a little bit too close for my liking. As for the base cover, you can see there's a center spot, which is quite hot. On either side, because they're fans, it's not as bad. But generally recommend using it on a laptop stand or where there's plenty of ventilation. Just to say, this is a worst case scenario temperature. So if you're not stressing both the CPU and GPU, it's going to run quite nicely. I think when on the web, I can barely notice the heat on the center of the laptop, but when you do use it properly, it does give you the heat. In the medium workload, the surface temperature on the keyboard is reasonably okay, still a little bit warmer on the center of the keyboard. 2 sides are cooler because that's where the fans are. Whereas on the base cover, in the medium workload, you can see that there's still a hot spot, same area, but it's less visible, so it's about 35 degrees C on the base cover, so still use it on your lab if you can. So this is a benchmark, just to say that these are run in the optimal settings, not the high performance mode. The optimal setting we think is what many people will be using this laptop on. So if you enable ultra performance, you'll get more performance, but also more noise. Looking at the benchmark, this is a Premiere. It's actually the first laptop we've tested which is faster than our reference PC. Very impressive. The Lightroom is also noticeably faster than the more ultra-portable laptop we've recently tested, as you expect. Blender CPU, again, it's quite powerful. This is a full-fat 8-core processor. Keep in mind, AMD versions are the 15 watts chips. this benchmark, Dell probably multi-sources SSD. You can see decent performance. It will be even faster when you put PCIe 4 into this. This is a battery run test done at above 150 nits. As you can see, it's quite impressive for a laptop with dedicated graphics. In the Geekbench GPU, this shows just how well the NVIDIA does relative to the integrated options. In Geekbench 5, you can see the multi-core performance, courtesy of a larger chassis, is very decent. It's an 8-core chip after all. In the single core of the Geekbench, you can see Intel edging ahead of the AMD versions of the recent laptops, but the AMD will be the lower wattage ones. Here's just a Geekbench 5 snapshot. As for the gaming benchmarks, here's Assassin's Creed. As you can see, the Dell is the only one that's 1080p. The other business laptops are in the lowest setting. So the Dell in very high is still performing reasonably smoothly. Ignore the misleading chart here, but Dell in yellow is the only one that's 1080p at the moment. The other ones are low setting because they're business laptop with all dedicated graphics. Reasonably smooth performance here, even on the Ultra. Again, we just don't have data points for 1080p of gaming laptops. So hopefully in the future the AMD stuff disappears. But good performance here. Hope to have more dedicated graphic laptop data points. As for the Tomb Raider, you can see the same applies, 1080p. Yeah, it's a little bit close for comfort, the minimum frame, but copes reasonably well on average. Here are some additional gaming benchmarks, just in case that helps. You can see the Luxmark CPU plus GPU. The dedicated graphics definitely edges ahead here. Yeah, it's not even funny. As for the Passmark, here's a detailed breakdown. We're not going to annotate this too much. You can pause and look if you need it. So here's the overall score, how it stacks relative to the other laptops, just in case it's easier to read here. So Speedometer is mostly web workload, so it edges ahead of the AMD-based Ultrabooks. Not exactly apple to apple comparison, but then again, when you compare to the Apple M1, it doesn't quite reach there. Very close though. So let's sum this up. I think one of the more premium 2020 consumer-facing laptop has just got even better. I think that's a way to frame it, because I think CPU definitely a lot faster than before, especially in single thread, and GPU as well, 30 to 40%, that's quite a lift. There's probably some questions over time on if Dell lets you run higher performance modes for longer, but I think that's one of those BIOS scenarios that you don't really see for now. As for this laptop, you always have the eGPU support anyway, just in case you want to run external GPU. I'm not sure how realistic that scenario is, because if you wanted to do that, you probably want to do it on a laptop with a higher TDP for the CPU. So I think this one goes back down to 45 watts most of the time. So I think if you really wanted a laptop to run eGPU on, you probably want maybe a little bit higher sustained TDP. But again, that looks like a workstation laptop. And when you talk about that, you probably need a desktop. Additionally, some upgradability is good. So 2 M2 slots and 2 RAM slots, really good to have that still. Because if you think of the design ethos of minimum ports, you would have thought they probably have done away with that. So really great for that. You can still upgrade those parts. As for the ray tracing, I think that's additional plus. Some apps, creative apps may use it, which potentially could help to reduce your rendering time. If it affects you, then that would be great. It's nice to see an OLED option, even though it's priced. Yeah, personally, I think the Full HD is still the stronger model. It's just because battery life is, it's quite substantial, and additionally, it just lets you have a better starting price. I think that's appealing part. What could be improved? I think the top thing that comes to mind at this price range is the display refresh rate. So all three options currently have the 60 Hz display refresh rate. This is definitely not a budget laptop by any stretch of imagination. You probably expect 165 at the minimum now, and that's just a little bit, I don't know how much of that is to do with their display needing to be really thin. Generally, on the whole, people probably expect a little bit faster refresh rate. That's certainly something. So I don't know whether that looks like just one day appears on Dell's website, for instance, in a December update, or if it would take a 9520 for that to appear. The other point is that I think Dell has a really good relationship generally, it seems, with Intel. I think that's probably partly reflected by just how many AMD latitude you can see. Not many, actually. It's a shame to not see any AMD processor at the moment. The Ryzen 7 5800 is certainly really compelling, and I think it just lets them do a little bit more power efficient performance boost. I think it's a shame that we're not seeing it, but who knows, maybe in the next generation we'll see it. But I think for now, the advantage of going Intel is that you do get Thunderbolt 4, you do get all the niceties, for instance, PCIe 4 SSD support. At the moment, I'll probably say that if your laptop has some beefy power supply and beefy cooling, the AMD option is probably a little bit less compelling. Absolute performance terms. I think over time, so maybe for the next series, that's going to be certainly something to look at, because at the moment, if you put a 5800H into this, I reckon it probably can run a little bit cooler and give you comparable performance and give you that efficiency in performance. For context, I think this laptop, the battery life is surprisingly amazing. The fan doesn't actually ramp up that much, so I think this is definitely improvement on the 10th gen, which is a little bit unexpected. So maybe I'm just nitpicking on this whole AMD thing, but I think having more customer choice is definitely a bonus rather than a takeaway. The other thing that can probably be improved is a little bit more heat than I'd probably have liked on the top of the laptop when you on the keyboard, as you see in the thermal section. So it's a bit of a surprise. I don't know, maybe some people use this laptop on their laps, so maybe that's why they redirect more heat up. On the plus side, the ventilation of the heat, it's through the rear edge rather than the side, so it doesn't blow onto your hand. I think that's quite nice. So if I can conclude, I think what I'll probably say is, you do pay the premium for the absolute polish on this laptop in the hardware sense. It might still have some software glitches, imperfections that probably can be addressed if Dell wants to in the future firmwares. As far as the hardware and generally how it feels, how it works, I think this is probably one of the best Windows laptops. It doesn't mean that it's the best gaming Windows laptop. It's not really meant to do that, it seems. It's just, I think, for this budget, if you do spend it on gaming, you can get some much better performance. So I think you pay a little bit extra for this all-round polished aspect, and I think because it retains value quite well, maybe over, let's say, a year or two, maybe you actually spend not as much as a gaming laptop if you do intend to resell it. I think most people probably buy a laptop to use rather than buy a laptop with the depreciation rate in mind. That'd be strange, but yeah. So overall, really like it. If there's any question, just drop it in the comment section. Please do like and subscribe. It would help us to put more content on there. Thank you. See you guys.